You know the drill, smash that like button until it gives up. And hit subscribe because trust me, we're just getting warmed up here. Things are about to get intense. Our tale kicks off in the middle of devastation. Rose Palace, the proud fortress of the Ragnar clan, is engulfed in chaos and flames. Its people, servants, knights, and guards are being butchered like animals, one after another, by assailants who seem to appear out of nowhere. Amidst the slaughter stands Theo Ragnar, our protagonist, fighting desperately to fend off one of the attackers. He swings his sword upward, forcing the man back, but there's no time to celebrate. His opponent recovers, raising his blade high before bringing it down in a brutal arc Theo barely manages to block, his arms shaking from the impact. The Ragnar family is no ordinary noble house. For over 1,000 years, they've served as the Empire's great northern wall, a bulwark against any threat that dared approach. Their strength, whispered to be a legacy of dragons, runs deep in the bloodline. Every member is born with an almost unnatural power, magic that could topple mountains, stamina that would shame a warhorse, and sword skills that could carve a path through any enemy. That is, every member except Theo. Somehow, despite his blood, he was born with none of it. The black sheep in a family of prodigies. As if to hammer the point home, Theo takes a devastating blow to the stomach. The pain hits like a tidal wave, and he collapses to his knees. His attacker looks down at him with a sneer, his voice dripping with disdain. "Still don't get it, do you?" he taunts. "No matter how much you struggle, some things will always be beyond your reach." He spits the word out like a curse. "Talent." Slowly, the man removes his mask, revealing his face. It's Rendan, Theo's sword instructor. The shock stabs deeper than any blade. Theo's voice trembles with betrayal and fury as he demands answers, but Rendan only chuckles, a low, mocking sound. "It was pitiful, you know," he says, "watching you train every morning, like it would actually make a difference. You, the joke of the Ragnar family." He scoffs. "You should have just stayed hidden away, where you belonged." Anger flares in Theo's chest, giving him the strength to stand. "Did you become my instructor just to betray us?" he growls. "Just to sell out Rose Palace?" But before he can react, Rendan's sword flashes out, slicing into Theo's arm. Blood sprays across the ground as Theo screams, pain crashing over him like a wave. Rendan grabs Theo's hair and yanks his head up, forcing their eyes to meet. "Why are you blaming me?" he asks, his tone almost bored. "Look around. The palace is burning, your family is dying. And it's all because of you." His voice drops to a taunting whisper. "Why can't you see it?" As Theo's vision blurs from the pain, another figure steps forward, dragging a limp body behind him. He tosses the woman at Theo's feet like a discarded rag doll. Rendan's grin is cruel as he gestures to her lifeless form. "Your mother," he says, his voice soft with mock pity. Nothing but a cold, dead corpse now. The sight of his mother lying there, lifeless and broken, hits Theo harder than any blow. His breath catches in his throat, and a raw, desperate rage surges up from deep inside. "Rendan," he whispers, trembling as he reaches for the sword at his side. With a roar, he swings wildly, driven by nothing but blind fury. But before his strike can connect, a blade hurtles through the air and pierces his chest. The force of the impact knocks him flat on his back, and the world begins to fade. Blood pools beneath him as he struggles to breathe, and Rendan's companion sighs with exasperation. "Enough talking. Just finish him." Rendan lets out a weary chuckle. Fine. I was just reminiscing." As Theo's life slips away, a crushing sense of regret settles in. This can't be how it ends. He couldn't protect his family, couldn't prove himself, couldn't change a damn thing. As the flames consume everything he's ever known, a bitter thought echoes in his mind. Maybe if he'd had even a shred of talent, things could have been different. His tears mingle with the blood on his face as he closes his eyes, darkness swallowing him whole. But then, as if reality itself has decided to play a cruel trick, a system message appears out of thin air. "You have died. Your trait has activated." Returning to the regression point, Theo's eyes snap open, and he finds himself back in the training yard, staring at a very much alive Rendan, who's casually suggesting they wrap up for the day. Theo blinks in confusion, the memories of his death still vivid. Did he really die? Or was it all some kind of sick dream? Rendan, noticing Theo's faraway look, raises an eyebrow. What's gotten into you? You're completely out of it. Theo, still reeling, wonders if what he experienced was real. Could that have been the afterlife? If it was, then death certainly had a twisted sense of humor. Before he can even begin to make sense of it all, another system message pops up in front of him. Tutorial quest number 1. Punch Rendan in the face. Theo stares at the prompt, utterly bewildered. What kind of absurd task is this? He glances back and forth between Rendan, who's looking increasingly impatient, and the message floating in front of him. Rendan doesn't seem to see it, so whatever this is, it's happening just to Theo. What's wrong with you? Rendan snaps, but Theo's attention is elsewhere. His wooden sword drops from his hand, and he takes a step forward, his fist trembling with a mix of confusion and anger. Whatever's going on, whether it's divine intervention or a hallucination, Theo figures he might as well take advantage of it. If this is a dream, then why not give Rendan a good punch? Theo swings his fist with all the force he can muster, and it lands squarely on Rendan's jaw. The entire yard goes silent. But to Theo's surprise, the punch barely seems to faze Rendan at all. Why does this feel so real if it's just a dream? Before he can ponder it further, Rendan's wooden sword cracks against his shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Theo gasps in pain, his confusion only deepening. Can you feel pain in a dream? Rendan shakes his head. You've lost it, he says, his tone a mixture of disappointment and irritation. With the awakening ceremony so close, you're cracking under the pressure. He scoffs and turns to walk away. Next time, try using a sword. That's what a Ragnar is supposed to do. Theo lies in the dirt, stunned, as the knights nearby start to snicker. Did you see that? What an idiot. One of them jeers. Is he really a Ragnar? Even an illegitimate child would have more talent. Theo touches his cheek, still stinging from the slap of reality. The sensations are all too real. This isn't some flashback, it's actually happening. He remembers that the awakening ceremony was supposed to happen 10 years ago. Could it be that he's somehow been thrown back to his 17-year-old self? Just then, the system appears again. Congratulations on completing tutorial quest number 1. Ragnar's talent has been activated. Theo stares at the message, his mind racing. His talent awakened? The system asks if he wants to claim his reward. With nothing to lose, he raises a trembling hand and selects yes. Instantly, a surge of light radiates from his body, and his stats skyrocket as if he's suddenly turned into some kind of overpowered hero. He barely has time to process it all as he stammers. What in the world is going on? Later, back in the guest room of Rose Palace, Rendan reports to Lady Cecilia Ragnar, Theo's mother. Honestly, I've never seen anyone with so little talent, he says, though his voice carries a hint of amusement. But that's precisely why I'm here, to whip him into shape before the awakening ceremony. She nods, pressing a small bag of gold coins into his hand, asking him to give Theo some extra attention. Rendan smirks. Don't worry, I'll work him day and night, he says, exuding false confidence. But as he turns away, his expression darkens, and he mutters under his breath, she's going to need to worry. In his mind, neither Cecilia nor Theo is destined for greatness. Their bloodline, as far as Rendan is concerned, is as useless as Theo's sword skills. Still, he doesn't mind. The gold is real and he's getting paid after all. Rendan's smirk stretched across his face. His salary was fat, his title of swordsmanship tutor to the Ragnar family's direct line was secure, and thanks to some secret deals, his future was looking brighter than Theo's prospects ever had. Sabotaging Theo's progress while feeding info to some mysterious backer had become his ticket to success, and Theo, the so-called imbecile of Ragnar, was none the wiser. But just as he was savoring his private victory, a blur shot past him, nearly knocking him off balance. It was Theo, sprinting at full tilt toward the guest room without even a glance in Rendan's direction. Rendan's eyes narrowed as his sneer deepened. Idiot! He muttered under his breath. Can't even greet his own instructor. Theo burst into the guest room, breathless, and called out to his mother. Lady Cecilia Ragnar, sitting gracefully at a small writing desk, looked up, surprised but smiling sweetly. Theo, you're back. You must be exhausted from all that training. But instead of answering, Theo threw his arms around her, hugging her tightly. Her expression shifted to one of confusion as she stammered, "What's gotten into you?" Tears welled up in Theo's eyes, and he couldn't help but smile as he tightened his embrace. It was real. He really had returned to 10 years ago, before everything had fallen apart. The vivid memory of Rendan forcing him to stare at her lifeless body in that burning ruin came crashing back. But here she was now, alive and warm in his arms. The relief and joy were almost too much to bear. Cecilia gently pulled back to look at her son, her eyes filled with concern. "Theo, what's wrong?" she asked softly. But Theo wasn't about to explain the whole died and got sent back in time situation. Instead, he made a silent vow right then and there. He would change the future no matter what. Weak and talentless as he was now, he'd find a way to grow stronger. If that mysterious system was real, it could be the key to breaking the chains of his fate. He would become powerful enough to protect his mother. And when the time came, Rendan would pay dearly. As if on cue, a system message flickered into view. Tutorial quest number 2. Train your body to the limit. Theo didn't waste a second. He practically flew out of the guest room and headed straight for the training grounds, his legs pounding against the earth as he started running laps. Every step echoed with the single, burning focus that now fueled him: revenge. But he quickly realized that, in his current state, revenge wasn't something he could seize anytime soon. First, he needed strength, real strength. As he pushed his body harder, Theo's mind wandered back to a clandestine organization he'd become involved with in his previous life. Black Word. Even though his lack of skill had confined him to the information team, some of the secrets he'd uncovered back then might now prove invaluable. He recalled one in particular, a potent elixir called the Bloody Sword Emperor's Elixir, its true worth revealed only through an obscure manual in the future. If he could get his hands on it and combine it with a grueling training regimen, it could be the breakthrough he desperately needed. Hours passed as Theo continued his relentless circuit around the training grounds, not pausing even once as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. He was drenched in sweat, his muscles screaming, but the system kept feeding him updates. Progress. 27%. His determination only grew. A knight nearby, noticing Theo's unyielding pace, called out in disbelief. "How many laps have you run, young master? You look like you've been training for days." Theo ignored him, his focus unbroken. He picked up a wooden sword and began swinging it furiously between sprints, pushing himself further with each repetition. As the days bled into one another, Theo barely allowed himself time to breathe, let alone sleep. Evelyn Naravel, manager of training ground number 4, watched him from her perch, her brows knitting together as she took a long drag from her cigar. "So, this is the so-called imbecile of Ragnar?" she murmured to herself. Despite what everyone said about Theo being talentless, there was no denying the kid's dedication. She found herself questioning if maybe, just maybe, the rumors were wrong. Theo's limbs felt like lead, and every breath came with a sharp sting, but the system kept dangling that number in front of him. 97% completion. He gritted his teeth and pushed on, recalling how, just the night before, he had taken a brief rest upon reaching 90%. When he checked the system again, his progress had dropped. The cruel reality dawned on him. The system punished him for resting. It wanted him to go all out or not at all. Now, as he reached 98%, Theo forced himself to run harder, pushing his wooden sword through the air with all the speed he could muster. The final percentage point loomed like a mountain, and he wasn't about to let exhaustion steal this victory from him. Evelyn watched with wide eyes, her cigar forgotten in her hand, as Theo kept leaping and swinging, as though pain was just another enemy to be cut down. Finally, when the system flashed 100% completion, Theo's legs gave out beneath him. He crashed to the ground, barely able to move, his vision a blur of light and shadow. The system chimed in with a congratulatory message. Tutorial quest number 2 completed. Rewards unlocked. But the words swam before his eyes, and he couldn't make sense of them. With a trembling hand, he reached out and managed to click yes to claim his rewards. As soon as he did, his consciousness slipped away, and a bright light surged into his body, filling him with a strange, invigorating power. A powerful gust of air swept through the training ground, making Evelyn gasp. When Theo awoke, he bolted upright, instantly alert. He wasn't outside anymore but lying on a cot in a small room. Evelyn strolled in casually, the cigar still hanging from her lips. "Calm down, young master," she said. "You're in the break room." Collapsing like that after days of non-stop training, even a Ragnar would need a break. Theo recognized her instantly, which seemed to amuse her. She introduced herself with a knowing smile, then handed him a glass of water. "Drink up. You've earned it." Theo gulped down the water gratefully. As he did, Evelyn's expression grew more serious. "Tell me," she said, her voice low, "you know the rules about opening your mana hall before the awakening ceremony, don't you?" Theo blinked in surprise. "Yes," he replied slowly, trying to gauge where she was going with this. "And you know what happens to those who break that rule, don't you?" She pressed, her gaze never leaving his. "Why are you bringing this up?" Theo asked, his pulse quickening. "Because," Evelyn said, her tone dropping to a near growl, "just before you collapsed, there was a mana wave, one that aligns with the opening of a mana hall." She leaned in closer. "Did you open yours, young Master Theo?" Theo's thoughts spun. If his mana hall had indeed been opened, he shouldn't have survived. Yet he felt different, stronger. He remembered the system notification. Reward, Dragon Heart, came back to him in a rush. As a bonus for his fast completion, the system had granted him magic power equivalent to 10 years of training. He now possessed a Dragon Heart, a power so rare that even the most seasoned warriors could only dream of. A Dragon Heart. Mana halls were typically placed in the lower abdomen to avoid overburdening the human heart. But the heart of a dragon could house a mana hall directly, amplifying its power tenfold. It was a shortcut to overwhelming strength that no ordinary human could survive, until now. Theo's gaze shifted to Evelyn, realizing that she wasn't just some manager. She had once commanded the White Armored Dragon Cavalry, renowned for her principles and fearless leadership. Even the demon dragon who served in the cavalry had admired her. She was known for her integrity, despising dishonesty and cowardice. In his past life, Theo recalled how her strict adherence to honor had led her to resign as his mentor when he showed a lack of resolve. Now, standing before her with a power that could either be his salvation or doom, he had to tread carefully. If Evelyn found out about the Dragon Heart, she wouldn't just let it slide. The truth about his Dragon Heart and the mana hall within it was a secret Theo would guard with his life. If Evelyn discovered it, she wouldn't hesitate to report him for execution. Her principles were ironclad, no exceptions, no mercy. But Theo, a grin playing on his lips, considered his options. Could he outmaneuver her without tipping his hand? Theo's voice was calm but carried a weight of authority as he addressed Evelyn. "You know the consequences of accusing an heir of Ragnar without solid proof, right?" he asked, locking eyes with her. "Your suspicions alone could get me killed. But if you're wrong, well, that's a stain on the Ragnar name." Evelyn hesitated, her stern expression faltering as she absorbed his words. She knew all too well that if her accusations were unfounded, it would bring disgrace upon her, not him. Theo pressed on. "So, tell me then, what's the penalty for falsely accusing a member of the Ragnar family of breaking such a grave rule?" Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she answered, "Execution." There it was, the harsh truth, hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Theo nodded approvingly, acknowledging her knowledge of the law, and added with a provocative smirk, "Well, then, go ahead and check me if you dare." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. She had felt a mana wave. She was sure of it. Anger flared in her chest as she released a surge of her own power, preparing to inspect Theo's abdomen for the telltale signs of an opened mana hall. But as she looked, nothing appeared. No mana hall, no evidence of any forbidden act. Her brow furrowed in disbelief. Had she been mistaken? Theo tilted his head with feigned curiosity. "Nothing there, huh?" he asked, his tone light as if they were discussing the weather. Evelyn's face flushed with a mix of confusion and shame. She immediately dropped to one knee, bowing her head. "Forgive me, young master," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "I was wrong. I've committed a grave sin and I offer my life as atonement." But Theo wasn't interested in spilling blood. He understood the stakes and knew Evelyn had done what she believed was right. His smirk softened into a reassuring smile as he reached out and tapped her shoulder. "There's no need for all that," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "You acted out of duty, and there aren't many people brave enough to demand the truth from a Ragnar, knowing the risk." As Theo turned to walk away, he threw one last remark over his shoulder. "By the way, you were worried about my mana hall overflowing? That's quite the imagination you've got there. I'm just the bastard of Ragnar. Remember?" He chuckled. "Thanks for your concern, though." Evelyn watched him go, stunned and silent, the cigar still dangling from her lips, forgotten. As Theo left the training grounds break room, his thoughts lingered on his newly acquired dragon heart and the magic power the system had gifted him. 10 years' worth of accumulated strength, a potent force that made his future seem brighter than ever before. He would harness this power, sharpen it like a blade, and make sure the world would never see him as a helpless fool again. A few days later, the training ground echoed with the bark of Rendan's commands. "Your sword swing is all wrong, Theo," he shouted, growing visibly frustrated. "You need to adjust your stance more to the right." "How many times do I have to tell you?" Theo nodded, playing the part of an obedient student, though inside he was fuming. Pretending to be weak while enduring Rendan's lessons was getting more exhausting by the day. As Rendan stepped in to adjust Theo's grip, something clicked. Theo could see the subtle way Rendan was teaching him flawed techniques, deliberately setting him up for failure. There was no doubt in Theo's mind now. Someone else was pulling the strings behind Rendan's actions. He needed to find out who was orchestrating this grand betrayal. An idea sparked in Theo's mind, and he turned to Rendan, a sly grin creeping across his face. "Instructor, may I have a word?" he called out. Rendan's head snapped up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "We don't chat during lessons, young master," he snapped. But before he could continue, Theo calmly broke the wooden sword in his hands with a swift motion, tossing the pieces aside. "Then I'll make it quick," Theo said, his voice cold. "This training is nonsense. If you're such a great swordsman, how did you manage to become a mid-rank instructor with skills like these? You'd struggle against a low-rank demonic beast, let alone someone like me." The insult landed like a punch to the gut, and Rendan's face went white with fury. "Say that again," Rendan growled, barely keeping his composure. "I said your skills are garbage," Theo repeated, each word hitting like a hammer. He wasn't just looking to humiliate Rendan. He was setting the stage for something bigger. If he could provoke Rendan enough, maybe he'd be forced to reveal his connection to the hidden puppet master. Rendan's temper snapped. "Young master or not, you will not speak to me like that," he shouted, but Theo's calm demeanor remained unshaken. If Rendan was going to push things, then Theo would push back even harder. As he mulled over his options, it became clear. If he could force Rendan to resign, the chances of uncovering the true mastermind would increase dramatically. News of the confrontation spread like wildfire. At Camellia Palace, a knight rushed into the dining hall, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Have you heard? The bastard of Ragnar is set to duel his instructor next week." Across the room, Action Ragnar, one of the 4 hounds of the north known as the Dark Tiger, scoffed and hurled his glass at the knight. The glass shattered, and the knight collapsed, bleeding. "What does it matter if that so-called bastard gets himself half-killed?" Action sneered, wiping his mouth. Next to him, Remington Narcio, the Silver Lion, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Another figure stepped into the room, his presence commanding attention. It was Ed Troyven, the 9-dragon Sky Dragon, his gaze piercing. "You should care, Action," Ed cautioned. "Even a small flame can start a wildfire if you're not careful." Action's eyes narrowed, and he snorted. "Only those with real talent are worth worrying about. Why should I be concerned with Theo?" Ed's voice dropped to a low rumble. "Because when it comes to the Ragnar clan, even the smallest possibility can't be ignored." Remington bowed respectfully to Ed, but Action dismissed his uncle's warning with a wave of his hand. "Rendan will handle it. No need to fret over a duel with a bastard." A week later, training ground number 4 was buzzing with anticipation. Knights gathered around the stage as Theo and Rendan stepped forward. In the crowd, Evelyn stood alongside another prominent figure, their eyes fixed on the two combatants. Theo gripped his sword tightly, cursing himself for letting the situation escalate this far. What had started as a plan to embarrass Rendan and get him dismissed had spiraled out of control. But now that he was here, with the eyes of the crowd upon him, he had to make this fight count. The cheers of the audience faded as the system displayed his third tutorial quest: fight Rendan and win. He recalled the incident a week earlier, when he had snapped the wooden sword and dismissed Rendan on the spot, telling him to get lost. Furious, Rendan had protested, claiming his contract still had time left. But Theo had brushed him off. "If I say you're fired, he had declared with finality. Theo wasn't foolish enough to think he could kill Rendan with his current skills. But forcing a separation would give him time to investigate and gather more information. Rendan, however, wasn't about to let things go that easily. If he was dismissed, his mission would fail, and whoever had sent him wouldn't take that lightly. Rendan had practically chased Theo down, begging him to reconsider and threatening to report the firing to the tribunal, warning of the potential consequences. Just as the tension reached a boiling point, Evelyn had appeared and suggested a different solution. "Resolve it the Ragnar way," she said, her voice carrying a challenge. Theo stared at Evelyn, unsure if she was serious. "Settle it by a sword match?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, the rule of the strong. No need for the tribunal, just a straightforward duel. The victor decides." Rendan's face lit up at the idea, his confidence swelling. It was as if the gods themselves had handed him the perfect opportunity. Evelyn continued, setting the date. "1 week from now," she declared, her voice carrying a hint of challenge. "Does that seem fair?" Theo's heart sank, his mouth too dry to respond. Fair wasn't exactly the word he'd use. He glanced at Rendan, who was all too aware of Theo's current limitations, and grinned with smug satisfaction, practically daring Theo to back out. Meanwhile, 2 knights nearby whispered among themselves. "I heard the kid can barely swing a sword," scoffed the black-haired knight. "Isn't he still a Ragnar?" the brown-haired knight asked incredulously. "Not a normal Ragnar," the other snickered. "They call him the Ragnar cripple for a reason. No way he's taking down a mid-rank swordsman like Rendan." On the stage, Rendan offered Theo an out. "If you apologize now, I'll forget this ever happened," he said with false kindness. "There's no need to throw your life away over pride." But Theo's eyes sharpened as he shot back. "Funny. I was about to say the same. If you don't want to lose an arm, you'd better accept that you're fired." Rendan's expression darkened. The audacity! He had considered sparing Theo out of pity, but now he was going to kill him and pretend it was an accident. The outcome was obvious to him. This duel was as good as won. With a mocking flourish, he invited Theo to make the first move. "As your instructor, I'll graciously allow you the opening strike." Theo didn't need another invitation. He charged forward, shouting that he wouldn't hold back. Their swords met with a clash that echoed across the training ground. Within moments, Rendan's superior skill shone through as he unleashed a flurry of strikes, driving Theo back step by step. The audience murmured with disappointment. It was just as they'd expected. "Look at him," someone jeered. "The idiot can barely keep his footing." They laughed, speculating that if Theo didn't surrender soon, he'd be a corpse by the end of the match. Rendan's attacks came with increasing intensity as he sneered. "What happened? Theo? You're the one who looked down on mid-rank swordsmen, and now you can barely keep up." In Rendan's mind, Theo was still just an apprentice. Even if Theo's skills had seen some improvement lately, they were nowhere near good enough to win against him. If Theo had been at the level of the 4 Hounds of the North, it might have been different, but Rendan was certain there was no chance the so-called imbecile could best him. But despite the onslaught, Theo remained composed, his mind flashing back to the conversation he'd had with Evelyn earlier. He had sought her out to understand why she'd suggested the duel. "Why go that far?" he had asked. Evelyn had explained, "If you want to get rid of Rendan for good, you need to be thorough. He likely has a backer. Simply firing him won't be enough." Theo had been taken aback by her insight. "How do you know?" Evelyn revealed that she had grown suspicious of Rendan's bizarre teaching style weeks ago. One day, while observing the training ground, she'd noticed Rendan instructing Theo to angle his sword in an absurdly exaggerated way. It was the kind of advice that screamed of intentional sabotage. She then dug into Rendan's background and found traces linking him to Camellia Palace. That was when she realized this was more than just bad teaching, it was part of a larger scheme. Back in the present, Rendan's smirk faded as he noticed Theo pushing back harder than expected. "What is this?" he muttered. There was a confidence in Theo's movements that hadn't been there before, and it was unsettling. Theo's eyes gleamed with determination as he parried another strike, then pushed Rendan's blade aside with surprising ease. "Come on, Rendan," Theo taunted. "Is that all a mid-rank swordsman can do?" Rendan's anger flared. This wasn't right. Theo shouldn't have lasted this long. His strikes grew more desperate as he tried to overpower Theo, but each time, Theo's defenses held firm. The crowd's jeers turned to gasps of shock as they watched the Ragnar cripple, pushing back a seasoned swordsman. Amidst the audience, Remington observed the duel with a curious gaze, while Evelyn watched with a knowing smile. She recalled telling Theo that if she trained him personally for even a week, he'd easily handle someone like Rendan. "He's a disgrace of an instructor," she had said bluntly, "and he deserves to be put in his place." Theo had taken her words to heart, and now it was paying off, but something still nagged at him. In their earlier conversation, Theo had asked Evelyn why she was so invested in his success. "Is it because of what happened before?" he had inquired. Evelyn had admitted that was part of it, but then added cryptically, "There's someone I know who's obsessed with collecting talent. If they catch wind of your progress, they'll take an interest in you." Back on the battlefield, Rendan stepped back, raising his sword for a powerful strike. But when he brought it down, Theo blocked the blow effortlessly, sending a shockwave of doubt through Rendan. How was this possible? Theo, who had shown no talent his entire life, was suddenly fighting like an entirely different person. Rendan's thoughts raced as he wondered if Theo had been feigning weakness all along. With a sudden burst of speed, Theo closed the distance, his eyes cold as steel. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who's been pulling your strings, Rendan?" The question sent a jolt through Rendan, and he lashed out in rage, swinging his sword in a wide arc. "How dare you accuse me of?" Theo parried the blow, his expression calm. "Your teachings were substandard, designed to hold me back. But I found out about Camellia Palace." Rendan froze, his face paling. How could Theo have discovered that? Seeing the shock in Rendan's eyes, Theo grinned. He had hit the mark. With a sudden, fluid motion, Theo lunged forward. "Let's see how you like losing an arm," he whispered. Before Rendan could react, Theo's blade sliced clean through, severing Rendan's arm in one decisive strike. The audience gasped, and even Remington leaned forward, his eyes widening as Rendan's severed limb hit the ground. Rendan collapsed, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his screams tearing through the air. You'll pay for this!" He spat through the pain, but Theo's confidence was only growing stronger. He approached slowly, savoring the moment. The tables had turned, and the man who had once mocked him for being weak was now at his mercy. As Theo stood over Rendan, he reflected on how far he'd come. The boy who had once been called the imbecile of Ragnar was gone, replaced by someone ready to carve out his own path, one severed arm at a time. Theo stared down at Rendan, his face cold and unyielding. "Remember what you said to me before?" he asked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You told me it was my fault, that everything fell apart because I was weak." His expression darkened, his grip tightening on his sword. "Well, Rendan, it's your fault you're dying here today." Rendan's eyes widened, terror setting in as he fumbled to speak, his voice cracking. "Wait, please, But Theo's resolve was ironclad. Without a hint of hesitation, he swung his sword, and in a swift motion, Rendan's head separated from his body, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. The system chimed in immediately, congratulating Theo on completing his third tutorial quest. The crowd remained frozen, shock evident on every face. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, a glint of pride in her eyes. Amidst the sea of stunned spectators, a mysterious figure observed the scene, a satisfied smile curling at the corner of his lips. As the silence hung thick in the air, the system informed Theo that he had exceeded the quest's objective, granting him a bonus reward. Blood still on his face, Theo accepted it without a second thought. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Did that really just happen? A knight whispered. The so-called imbecile actually won? Another shook his head in disbelief. He's just an apprentice swordsman. How did he defeat a mid-tier like Rendan? Theo barely acknowledged the crowd's incredulity. He glanced down at Rendan's lifeless form, a wave of realization washing over him. In his past life, he had suffered at the hands of this weak, deceitful man. How could he have ever let Rendan hold power over him? The system pinged again, this time notifying him that his new ability, observation, had been activated as part of his reward, along with an additional year's worth of magic power. Theo marveled at the idea of a full year's power instantly granted to him, but couldn't help wondering what exactly observation could do. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a massive crash, the ground shaking beneath him. Theo looked up to see a figure descending from the sky, landing on the stage with enough force to crack the stone floor beneath their feet. His breath caught in his throat as the dust settled, revealing the unmistakable form of Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon and commander of the white armored dragon cavalry. A jolt of panic surged through Theo. Julius was no ordinary man. He was one of the 9 dragons, a legend in his own right. The crowd erupted in a mixture of awe and terror, the knights calling out, "It's Julius Ragnar! And the demon dragon is here!" Evelyn, standing at the edge of the training ground, exhaled a long sigh. "Does he always have to make an entrance like that?" she muttered. Couldn't he have used the stairs for once? As Julius strode toward Theo, his intense gaze seemed to pierce right through him. Theo's panic grew as the commander stopped only a few feet away, his eyes narrowing dangerously. But then, to Theo's utter shock, Julius threw his head back and let out a booming laugh, the sound reverberating across the training ground. He clapped a hand on Theo's back, nearly knocking him over. "That was quite the spectacle, young man," Julius exclaimed, his voice full of warmth. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." Theo blinked, struggling to process the sudden change in mood. Julius's fierce glare had been replaced by a look of genuine amusement. Did the student really surpass the master? Julius continued, a playful grin spreading across his face. "Ah, maybe that's a bit too generous, considering you killed him." He shrugged as if the act of beheading one's instructor was a minor inconvenience. "Well, Rendan probably had it coming." Before Theo could respond, Julius tightened his grip on his shoulder, his enthusiasm palpable. "How would you like to join the white armored dragon cavalry?" he asked. The offer hung in the air like a thunderclap, leaving Theo momentarily speechless. He glanced at Evelyn, who was watching with a knowing smile, as if she had anticipated this exact outcome. The knights whispered furiously amongst themselves, struggling to understand what they were witnessing. "Is he really being scouted into the white armored cavalry?" One knight murmured, "But he hasn't even gone through the awakening ceremony." Remington, who had been observing from a distance, turned to a fellow knight. "Has there ever been a case where an apprentice swordsman was recruited, especially one without an opened mana hall?" The knight shook his head, his expression serious. "No, not that I've heard of. It's unprecedented. A closed mana hall makes it impossible to gauge true potential." Despite the voices buzzing around him, Theo kept his focus on Julius. After a deep breath, he spoke with a tone of unwavering conviction. "I appreciate the offer, Commander, but I have to decline." The training ground fell deathly silent. Julius's smile faded as he stared at Theo, clearly taken aback. Remington and Evelyn exchanged confused glances, while the other knights were left speechless. Why would anyone turn down such an opportunity? As whispers filled the air, Theo's voice rose above the noise. "I'm not ready yet," he said, his eyes meeting Julius's. "There's more I need to accomplish on my own." Julius studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable, before breaking into another laugh. "You're an interesting one, Theo Ragnar," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Very well. If you're not ready now, I suppose we'll see if you change your mind in the future." In the days that followed, the story of Theo's duel spread like wildfire. Whispers about the imbecile of Ragnar, who had somehow killed his own master, rippled through the empire. Some scoffed, saying Rendan must have been a weakling for such an outcome to occur. Yet what truly captivated everyone was that Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon himself, had attempted to recruit Theo into the white armored dragon cavalry, only for Theo to turn him down. At Camellia Palace, Lady Amel Ragnar, the mistress of the estate and mother to Action, slammed a fist down on the table. "I can't believe Theo actually killed Rendan," she spat, her voice full of frustration. Her brother, Ed, sat across from her, his demeanor calm as always. "Rendan was assigned to Theo because of his lackluster skills," Ed reminded her. "It's no great loss." Emel's brow furrowed. "That's not the point," she retorted. "The real issue is that Julius reached out to Theo personally, and it appears Evelyn was the one who arranged the duel." She rubbed her temples, feeling the situation slipping out of control. "We can't interfere anymore. Not with Julius and Evelyn showing interest in him." Amel's thoughts were interrupted as the door opened and Action Ragnar sauntered into the room. "Mother, what do you mean by standing out?" he asked, his tone laced with arrogance. "Theo's still a nobody. Why worry?" Amel shot him a sharp look. "Because if Theo becomes too prominent, it'll be harder for us to seize control of Rose Palace." Action waved dismissively. "Theo's still powerless. Evelyn and Julius are always drawn to the underdogs. It doesn't change anything." Ed's gaze turned stern. "Don't underestimate him, Action. This could be more than just a fluke." Ignoring his uncle's caution, Action leaned against the table, a smirk curling his lips. "Since you're both so concerned, maybe I'll pay Theo a little visit and remind him where he belongs." The next day, after a rigorous training session, Evelyn praised Theo for his progress. "You've improved significantly," she said, her expression showing a hint of pride. Theo nodded, grateful for her guidance. "It's made a world of difference to learn from a real master," he admitted. "But joining the cavalry now, it would have limited my options." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And what options would those be?" Theo glanced toward the distant horizon, his thoughts on the future. "The top performer of the awakening ceremony receives privileges that surpass even the prestige of the cavalry," he explained. "I want to earn my place without relying on special treatment." Evelyn studied him thoughtfully, then smiled. "Commander Julius may be disappointed, but I think I understand your choice." Curious, Theo activated his new observation ability. A screen appeared, revealing that Evelyn was 24 years old, a high-ranked swordsman, and former deputy commander of the White Armored Dragon Cavalry. Her current status showed she admired his humility, enjoyed teaching him, and missed her time with the cavalry. The insight made Theo smile. The ability was proving to be more useful than he'd anticipated. But before he could say more, a young man approached, his steps brisk and his posture respectful. "Excuse me, young master," he said, introducing himself. "My name is Sibaldry from the Southern Inspection Post. There's something urgent we need to discuss." As Theo eyed Sybil cautiously, he couldn't help but notice the young man's intense expression. Intrigued, he activated his observation skill once more. The system revealed a surprising profile. Sibaldry, age 17, the dunce of the Southern Inspection Post, and an apprentice swordsman. His rank was loyalty, and his status indicated a strong admiration for Theo, along with an earnest desire to spar with him. Theo blinked, taken aback. The stern-faced Sybil actually wanted to challenge him to a match? At that moment, the system chimed in with a new notification. Final tutorial quest. Discard the title Imbecile of Ragnar. Completion goal 100%. It showed that Theo was already at 28%. As he processed the information, Sybil spoke up, admitting that he had once looked down on Theo, believing the title Ragnar's Imbecile had suited him. A surge of anger flared in Theo, and he instinctively gripped his sword. But before Theo could act on his irritation, Sybil continued, his tone sincere. "I've seen you train every morning," he confessed. "You worked harder than anyone, and the result was a miracle. You defeated Rendan, earned the attention of the demon dragon himself. You became someone worth admiring." Sybil's eyes were filled with determination. "I almost gave up after being mocked as the idiot of the Southern Inspection Post, but watching you gave me hope." Sybil then bowed deeply, raising his sword above his head in a gesture of respect. "Please, young master, grant me the honor of crossing swords with you," he implored. Normally, Theo would have been suspicious of such a request, but the observation skill confirmed Sybil's sincerity. It was unexpected, but Theo realized that taking down Rendan and attracting the attention of Julius Ragnar had made him a target for those seeking to prove themselves. What surprised Theo even more was that some, like Sybil, wanted to follow him instead. Perhaps, despite everything, the pride of the Ragnar name still carried weight. Theo knew he would eventually need loyal followers if he were to rise to the head of the Ragnar clan. His final quest, to discard the title of Imbecile of Ragnar, was not just about gaining strength. It was about gaining respect and loyalty. Turning to Evelyn, Theo asked if they could have a moment. She gave him an encouraging nod, a proud smile forming on her lips. "Show him what you've got, Theo," she said. Theo raised his sword, formally introducing himself. Theo Ragnar, apprentice swordsman of Rose Palace, awaiting the awakening ceremony. Evelyn Naravel is my master. Evelyn's smile grew at the mention of her name, a glint of pride in her eyes. Sybil mirrored the introduction. Sybil Dree, apprentice swordsman of the Southern Inspection Post, practitioner of the Kure clan's quick sword style. With the formalities complete, Theo gave a nod. "Let's have a good spar." Without hesitation, Sybil dashed forward, his sword flashing in a blur. But Theo was prepared, blocking the initial strike with ease. Sybil's eyes widened. "You're fast!" he exclaimed, his tone a mix of surprise and excitement. For someone labeled as the Southern Inspection Post's idiot, Sybil's speed was nothing to scoff at. Sybil pressed the attack, launching a flurry of strikes at Theo, who met each blow with practiced precision. As the clash continued, Theo's thoughts drifted back to his past life, where he would have struggled against even a novice. But now, with a surge of strength, he raised his sword and sent Sybil flying backward, easily overpowering him. Sybil hit the ground hard, letting out a grunt of pain, but his expression was anything but disappointed. A grin spread across his face as he struggled to stand. "You're incredible, young master," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I'm honored to have lost to you." Theo lowered his sword, signaling the end of the duel. "Well fought, Sybil. You did well." As Theo sheathed his weapon, he caught his reflection in the gleaming blade. A thought occurred to him. Could he use his observation skill on himself? His curiosity piqued, he activated the skill. To his surprise, it worked, displaying his own profile, Theo Ragnar. The title Imbecile of Ragnar was still present, but his talents included Player, Ragnar, and Observation, with 4 additional talents marked as Denied Access. His status indicated a strong yearning for the awakening ceremony, while his level remained at 1. The system listed his stats: Strength 13, Dexterity 14, Vitality 12, Magic Power 190, Intelligence 11, and Luck -49. A notification popped up, explaining that his stats were now perceivable as numerical values. Theo noted the categorization of his talents and wondered if completing more quests would unlock the hidden abilities. He was pleased to see his high magic power, a combination of his past life's experiences and the dragon heart's strength. However, the negative luck stat puzzled him. Was he cursed? Had the misfortunes of his previous life been due to this low luck value? He deactivated the skill, determined to find a way to increase his luck stat. Before he could dwell on it further, the sound of approaching footsteps caught his attention. He turned to see several knights watching him intently. Evelyn observed the scene, crossing her arms. "Rendan may have been a weak swordsman," she commented, "but he was still mid-rank, defeating him and earning Julius's approval. It makes you a figure to be envied or admired." The knights gathered around Theo seemed to fall into the latter category. They had witnessed his spar with Sybil and whispered among themselves, confirming that the rumors were indeed true. "Could we have blocked those strikes if we were in Sybil's place?" one knight murmured. Among them, Auden Nalin stood out. He wanted to spar with Theo but hesitated to speak up. Sensing his apprehension, Theo used observation on him. Auden was 19 years old, the pillar of the Nalin Viscount, and a low-ranked swordsman. His talent was listed as passion and perseverance, and his status revealed a strong desire to challenge Theo. With a small sigh, Theo called out, "Auden, isn't it?" The young man's eyes widened in surprise. "You know my name, young master?" he stammered. Theo simply gestured for him to step forward. "Come on, let's have a spar." he said, his tone commanding but not unkind. Auden's face lit up with excitement, and he quickly drew his sword. "It would be an honor," he exclaimed, introducing himself as the third son of Viscount Nalin and practitioner of the double ascension sword style. Theo nodded, repeating his own introduction. "Theo Ragnar of Rose Palace. Let's see what you've got." The two rushed at each other, their swords clashing in a resounding echo. As they sparred, Theo's basic swordsmanship proficiency increased. Auden pulled back, gathering momentum, and swung with a force aimed at Theo's neck. Theo reacted swiftly, blocking the blow and pushing Auden's sword aside. His changing heart swordsmanship proficiency also increased. Auden, stunned by Theo's skill, took a step back and admitted defeat, his voice shaky. I lost," he said, struggling to catch his breath. The system informed Theo that he had gained Auden's approval, and his luck increased by 1 point. Theo raised an eyebrow at the notification, wondering if earning people's respect could truly affect his luck. Did it also track his reputation? Before he could ponder the implications, another knight stepped forward, and Theo's attention snapped back to the present. He continued challenging his opponents one after another. Each victory earned him their approval, and each approval seemed to nudge his luck upward. Bennett Romero's respect granted him another point, followed by Eric Morin, then Manfred Monbert. With each duel, his confidence grew. As he took a brief pause to catch his breath, Theo glanced at the gathered knights. "Who's next?" he called out. But when no one stepped forward, he opened his status window, only to find that despite all the duels, his quest progress had increased by just 1%. Confused, he wondered if it was because these knights already held some respect for him. If that were the case, then defeating them wasn't enough to truly discard the title of Imbecile of Ragnar. He would need to aim higher.